From global to local, how to overcome barriers in implementing global policies and strategies in local contexts. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. We have Paul Brady, Natalia, Selinger, and Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska joining us today. Hello there.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I think in the spirit of the dynamics of this conference, instead of me quoting long bios from your impressive achievements, allow us to start with a quick pitching contest like self-introduction. All right, can we start with you, Natalia, perhaps?
Thank you, Łukasz, very much. So, hi everyone, my name is Natalia Selinger and I'm Managing Director at Luxoft Poland. And currently I'm leading the agenda of diversity and inclusion globally at Luxoft.
Anna, can we go to you?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska. I am the CEO and founder of Diversity Hub, who hosts this festival. And my daily job is implementing strategic programs and projects in the field of D&I. And I also build accountability of leaders for diversity and inclusion in huge companies.
Thank you, Anna. Paul?
Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to come along today. I'm Paul Brady. I work for Franklin Templeton, who are one of the world's largest asset managers. I am a member of our UK boards and our Luxembourg board. I also have a number of roles to play in the space of diversity and inclusion at Franklin Templeton. I'm part of our executive advisory group and I chair our UK advisory committee. I'm delighted to be here and I'm calling in from my home office in the south of England. So I don't feel as it's a little less tidy and professional than the backdrop of my fellow speakers. Thank you, Łukasz.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you with us today. We only have 22 minutes to dissect a very complex topic of global policies translated to local circumstances. Paul, we had a very interesting chat yesterday around those issues, especially in the context of your experience with multiple offices the company has already built in different cultural contexts. Can we start with you and with the big question, can a global D&I strategy be implemented in a non-diverse way, so to say, in the sense that, you know what I mean? Employees at local level and companies, entire departments at local level do not necessarily accept in full whatever comes as a global policy.
Yeah, so first I think that I would say that first the organization has to have some guiding lights and some guiding principles around what it stands for in the space of diversity and inclusion. And then from a policy, and in this context, what I mean is a business practice sense, it needs to work out, in my view, what's important and what's acceptable around the globe, for it around the globe. Then it needs to be willing and inclusive enough to understand how that can be interpreted in different locations, but sticking to the core principle, not disposing of things which are inconvenient or not useful in a local context. It's important that the best standards and the best practices are those you strive for in as many locations as possible. And I think for us, we've tried to make some of our employment policies as consistent as possible around the globe, taking into account that in the case of employee benefits, for example, it's not always possible to have the same level of benefit in all aspects. The objective is to have as consistent as possible a policy. I completely accept your viewpoint that says in a local context, not everything may necessarily be appropriate, but the principles that drive the inclusion and the diversity in the workplace need to be consistently driven from the top of the organization. And that example of what's required or expected should be part of the corporate narrative from the senior leadership group.
very much, Paul. And can I ask our studio team just to keep all the 4 windows on the screen? It would be lovely to see all of you throughout this panel discussion instead of getting the close-ups and feeling that somebody is hiding behind Paul, for instance, on the screen.
Yeah.
We're living in an on-screen reality, ladies and gentlemen. Anna, tell me, you talk to lots and lots of companies, including obviously on the D&I policies. Do you come across resistance when you talk to those companies when it comes to adapting to or implementing global policies on D&I? Or is it a completely natural process?
Well, usually it's not. And if you ask me, is it possible to implement D&I policy in a non-diverse way? So, well, I can say, yeah, it's possible. But then we need to ask, but with what result? So, because you can implement anything, but we need to remember the most important thing in diversity and inclusion. So inclusion, and what inclusion means. Inclusion means asking people, and inclusion means including people to the process. So, of course, I agree with Paul that we need to have priorities, strategies. We need to have a plan. We need to have a global approach, but we need to remember about local circumstances. We need to always take into account local environment, I would say, and those environments are completely different in different regions. And even though we think, for example, about Europe, that it can be not so, maybe that can be cultural, universal culture we will find there, it's not true. So, for example,
right,
if you
Anna,
think about...
let me push you a little.
Yeah?
Let me push you a little on that.
Yeah?
Because obviously, there will be areas of conflict, but for our audiences to be able to imagine a specific scenario where a difficulty can emerge, can you think of something tangible, something relatable?
So my experience is that usually people in the field, I would say, they treat the D&I policies as it is imposed. Yeah, it's not given to implementation, taking into account those local environment and local specifics. But it's like something that comes out of from outer space, and that's crazy, because then we have a little chance to have it accepted. So one thing is for sure to listen people, to let them speak and to take their voice into account. So this is one thing. A second thing is that we need to, just to have a success on a local implementation, is to find a way how to make people identify with our D&I strategy. So we need to find a link for their daily basis problems, to their real challenges. Sorry?
Oh, I get it. So what it seems to me from what Paul and Anna are saying is that obviously there is a difference between inclusion and imposition. Once a company tries to impose anything on employees on local level, no matter if those values appear universal or not, you need to make sure that employees are listened to at local level and develop tools specifically to make sure you have gathered all those voices.
Yeah, and I would also add that what we need to find and what we need to assess, it's a real readiness of the local of people we have in our local grounds. So, but that readiness means for me readiness of the structure of the company and readiness of the leaders, and also readiness and attitudes of people who are working there.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Natalia, as I understand, you're running the whole center now. How does it feel to have increased the scope of activities under your umbrella now?
Well, if you are passionate in the topic, within the topic, it's really a huge challenge, and it gives you a lot of positive vibrations related to what you are doing. So I'm really happy that I have a chance to run global D&I agenda at Luxoft, working together with global leaders, with local leaders, and my team who is, helping and support global initiatives coming through.
Natalia, Luxoft is a very successful company. Tell us how to be sure that global strategies actually fit local contexts.
Well, I of course would like to, agree with Paul and with Vanna that it's really important to have principles which are established on the global level. But of course, you need to have some bodies, some people who will take care of implementation of these principles on the local context, right? So at Luxoft, to make sure that this accountability and ownership are exercised at all levels, we have created a special governing model which help us, to have this bridge between global and local context. So we have diversity and inclusion global committee, which is taking care of global context, of global principles and focuses, and whereby this diversity and inclusion local committees are taking care of local context. As we know, right, it can be different. We have different social, cultural context, regulatory context, and different starting points.
Regulatory context especially is what we will be talking about during this conference, and how they can complicate the process of implementing global strategies at local levels. But tell me, when you look at the way D&I is implemented across Luxoft, how important is it that as soon as possible this process actually becomes also bottom-up, not only top-down, someone trying to impose a strategy on everyone?
So we strongly encourage local people to come up with their local action plans and to propose them on the global agenda. So if you would like to compare two countries, for example, Poland and Romania, and we would like to speak about principle which is related to creation of inclusive working environment. For example, in Poland, our headcount, our people are in 50% relocated, right? So we have 50% of people who come to us from all corners of the world. And if you would like to take to the consideration the business needs, which are related, of course, to topic, we would like to attract those people to Poland, and we would like to keep them and make them happy here to stay with us, right? So what we did is to create a special one-team program which foster adaptation into the Polish life and culture. And this is totally Polish, Polish approach and our local project. And if you would like to compare it with Romania,
it sounds funny to me. It sounds funny to me when you say something is totally Polish. That in itself is interesting.
Well, we started from Poland, but this program is right now implemented all around the world, when we have in other locations this kind of, headcount structure. And if you would like to compare it to Romania, we have only one people who are relocated there. So there is no need to have such program, right? So we are focusing on the business needs, which are there related to attraction, young generation at the company and engage them to the company. So, totally different business needs, the same principle.
Natalia, I will come back to you in a moment, but before I do, let me ask you to think a little more about the negotiation space across culture and organizations. To what extent would a D&I policy be negotiable, and what kind of tools you could possibly have for fostering this kind of negotiation space? But before I come to you with this question, let me address the same question to Paul. Before talking to you, Paul, earlier, and while researching for this panel, I read a couple of articles with you, very interesting ones, quantifying Franklin Templeton's efforts in D&I. But let me ask you this very question that I just asked to Natalia. How negotiable is this space, and to what extent can you develop tools for negotiating local D&I policy for implementation?
I'm not sure negotiation is part of that process, actually, to be honest, Lukasz, because I think if you have a set of principles determined, for me, those values are part of what the workplace represents. And it's very difficult in different cultural environments to say, no, this is the way Franklin Templeton behaves and exists in this jurisdiction. And it may be slightly at odds with cultural values, which is often used as an excuse not to implement different approaches to diversity and inclusion. And
But
you have to respect those values, but at the same time, the organization is saying, lovely, but in this workplace, this kind of behavior is not acceptable, or this kind of approach is not acceptable. And I think that the organization has to reinforce its values against a context of what's happening outside the workplace. And it becomes very challenging, particularly where you've got a direction that is at odds with the values that you are trying to enshrine in the organization.
Just listening to the words we're using in this conversation around negotiation, it sounds like a one-way communication a little too much. I understand when it comes to the core values and principles of implementing D&I policy, but is there really so little negotiation space when trying to migrate the global policy to a very local context? In other words, does it have to be my way or highway?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the values and the principles are not negotiable. The execution may not take place in exactly the same way. It's not telling people how to execute local policy, but it is about making sure local policy isn't at odds with the values that you're trying to enshrine in terms of inclusion in the workplace. So I could give you an example. For us, it's very important to have a multi-generational workforce. It's important to have very talented, gender-balanced workforces. It would have been in Poland, for example, it was important for us to have childcare on our facility because that enabled us to attract a workforce that needed childcare. That was a negotiated arrangement for Poland. That isn't standard practice in every location that we operate. So there is some negotiation, but it aligns with the principles. It's not different. Because often negotiation is about not doing it, because in my country we don't, and that isn't acceptable.
Well, if any other Franklin Templeton employees are listening to us now, Paul, chances are they will all now want to have nurseries in their offices. So you got yourself into a little bit of trouble.
But if that's an important criteria, we do take that into account when we're thinking about developing our locations. That's part of what does it take to be a successful employer in this place?
Exactly. Thank you very much, Paul. Natalia, can we come back with the same question to you?
Well, I would agree with what Paul said before. So, of course, principles are not negotiable. They are, showing you a focus and showing you directions. And I think that there is some flexibility and options for implementation of these principles in the location, but the direction is clear. So this principle shows the company where to go.
Mm-hmm. And can you think of most typical, very common barriers to such implementation efforts? What would they be?
Well, I think, I thought about the different starting points. So if you think about implementation of diversity and inclusion in UK and for example, in Russia, you have different starting points. Another point I was thinking about is that there is a different needs, and these needs coming from business, coming from community, coming from global, company approach. So you have to combine it, and at the end come with some programs, projects, which will help to implement all these different views, different needs. it is of course great if you have the same business needs, community needs, and it's of course very much simpler, while implemented. But sometimes, you can have different views. So I think different starting points, and the second, different needs.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Anna, tell me,
Thank you.
are there any tricks up your sleeve that you can share with companies in trying to implement such policies? Is there anything special that you usually start the conversation with?
Yeah. When I'm listening to our conversation, what comes into my mind is that we on strategic level often lives like in a bubble. So what we struggle in Diversity Hub when we really help companies implement policies, and what we find here on the field, I would say, is that people don't know what does it mean. People don't know what diversity and inclusion means. So we usually need to start with, really, because now you need to be aware that people, even top-level managers, usually need to have it explained that diversity and inclusion doesn't mean gender or LGBT plus.
Anna,
issues.
I can understand that today in different corporations, people don't know what equity means, given the fact that it has an accounting background, real estate background.
But we need to realize maybe it sounds obvious, but we need to realize and take it into account. And I really have a feeling that many times in many companies, it is really forgotten topic. So that is the first thing I would like to share, that really people don't understand. So what we start with is finding a common language, how to translate what diversity and inclusion means for us in certain company, how we understand it, and how we can gather people around that idea. Just not to what I said before, just not making them the impression that it is, it comes from the outer space, because people are oriented on business. So diversity and inclusion is often, the topic which is imposed, or it's like treated like a kind of fashion or something like this, because it comes from the United States, on other countries, and we here in Poland or in other locations don't know really what to do with that. So there are a lot of things I could really say about it. But first is that we need to start from the beginning, from translating and finding common understanding. Then it's easier to convince.
It's a very sad conclusion, Anna.
Yeah,
it's a very
that's
sad
very
conclusion.
sad. Another thing
coming from the CEO of Diversity Hub, who has a lot of exposure to those companies.
Yeah, we tend to forget about frontline managers. Usually we focus on top-level management, and it's okay, because we need to cascade diversity and inclusion. We need to build that accountability from the top. I understand it, and I back up that process, of course. But many times we forget about those who are really responsible for creating the culture. So according to many research, frontline leaders make up or influence 80% of our staff, but they often receive just 20 to 30% of organizations' attention on training, for example. So they lack tools, they lack structure, they lack organization support, they lack know-how. And sometimes I think they seem to be left alone with those implementations. So this is the thing also to take into consideration.
Thank you, Anna. Natalia, I understand from your experience, it makes sense to sometimes prioritize D&I efforts a little, in the sense that different locations want to deal a little differently with those priorities. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's because we have different starting points in the locations, so there should be some kind of space for their local approach.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, that our time is almost up. Time flies, but still, I would like to have a roundup of conclusions, because it seems to me from our quick and short and succinct discussion that the conclusion that is emerging is, on the one hand, yes, the global policies need to be implemented consistently. You cannot have different worlds in different locations when it comes to principles and policy. But at the same time, there appear to be several issues. One is awareness, going to the fundamentals. Like you said, Anna, you mentioned that even understanding those terms properly, diversity and inclusion, comes as a challenge years from when the discussion really started in earnest. And secondly, it's a question of relatability and ownership, which is basically looking at the whole thing bottom up. The biggest challenge. So if I were to just address one quick question to you all as a summary of this panel discussion, that would be, when you look at how the pandemic has impacted your D&I efforts, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? Paul, can we start with you? Unmute, please.
Every panel needs an idiot. So thanks for that. I would say on the ground, it's been much harder for us to execute on the ground activities face-to-face, which is a lot of what we've done in the past has been face-to-face in certain locations. So that's been impossible. Video helps, but it doesn't fix that. I would say, secondly, the pandemic has encouraged us to focus much more on the mental health and the well-being of our employees in a remote location. And from top down, all through the organization, every people leader has been encouraged to pay attention to that topic as part of building an inclusive workplace, as well as looking after the employees.
Thank you, Paul. Anna?
For me, the main issue is being disconnected, and the main challenge in diversity and inclusion in a COVID era would be building the sense of belonging. How to do it when we are, dispersed and we don't meet each other, and we have so many barriers. So sense of belonging as a fundament of understanding of D&I.
I also have two questions from our chat window, so I will at least explain them to you in a moment. But before that, Natalia, your first thoughts?
So my first thought was about managers. So we need to, support managers in their daily work to be more inclusive, to work with people, to be close to the people.
And so we have two questions, ladies and gentlemen. We've got one from Zofia, who asks, I am curious how to deal with differences in awareness at the implementation stage at a local level. Level of maturity and understanding of D&I between countries can vary greatly, no doubt, as we can guess from this discussion alone. Anyone would like to comment on that?
Well, maybe
me.
Yeah, no. From my point of view, I was waiting for the others. From my point of view, is what I mentioned before: building the common understanding and talking to people, listening to people, letting them speak, including them into the conversation. This is the solution.
Exactly. Awareness is one thing, but it's really, you've been very gentle, Anna, the way you put it. It's actually about education in many instances, understanding the basic commonalities of it. And the second question we have, Maria Teresa, if I can build on Zofia's question, I would be also interested in the bottom-up plans mentioned previously. Do you have examples of those? Can you think of an example of bottom-up plans if they're successful? In situations, especially where the workforce is not so diverse.
Yeah, so I would give you some examples of a couple of examples of things we've done in India, particularly where we had a very unrepresentative workforce, a lot of senior leaders who were men. Over a period of time, there's been a concerted effort, multi-year, to develop a pipeline of successful female talent to take leadership positions, but also to set an agenda to be talking about female inclusion in the workplace, gender equality, as well as underlining that with policies around what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in the workforce. So that has been a bottom-up effort, because that's been born out of a need to, the organization says, what are you doing with gender inclusion? And then the local leadership has responded to that, and the employees have embraced that through a series of events and activities to build awareness and raise that as a topic that people need to be front and center in their thinking, particularly leaders in team scenarios, not just the executives.
Thank you very much, Paul. Anyone else would like to comment? Natalia? Not necessarily.
So no, I was thinking about the first question from Zofia, and I think that my point is that we need to find right people in the location. So like champions, right? Who will be like people who will take the message and spread this message among to people from the location. So I would vote for these champions.
Natalia.
Yeah. So following.
Yeah, carry on. It's always much more joyful with everyone speaking.
I would only add and share my experience following what Natalia said, that role models and champions, yes, but we need to find people who will be close to our people, to our staff. So not presenting role models which are completely unachievable, if you know what I mean. So people who are similar to us, who are easy to identify, that are real role models and real role models to follow.
Natalia, Anna, Paul, Yes, Paul, please finish.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. You need evangelists to lead the message, and they don't need to be the senior leaders. They need to be the most passionate and most informed, and the senior leadership needs to give them permission.
Yeah.
And last question to you all, fortunately in the yes or no category. Is it any easier to find D&I ambassadors these days compared to, say, 1 year ago? Yes or no?
No.
Yes, if your organization permits it and encourages it.
Fair enough.
I would vote for yes as well.
Anna? Something optimistic in conclusion, Anna? Say yes.
Well, I can say a lot of optimistic things, but for me, COVID circumstances are really difficult. So it's what I see when I see companies challenging with inclusion and with really gathering people around ideas, around values. It is so difficult. So from this point of view, it may be difficult to find new role models.
Natalia, Anna,
people engaged, yeah.
Engaged indeed. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Have a lovely day, and stay with us for the conference.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.